Hello and welcome back to Speed Demon Painting, where today we are taking a look at the Commonwealth Order of Battle, or ORBAT for short. As always, we are diving in with the special rules that you can find in this fleet, and we're starting off with the weapon qualities. Now there is one main type of weapon that the Commonwealth uses that no other nations get, and those are their railguns. Now, the citadel of the initial target receives a -1 against attacks with this quality. That is a bit of a nerf compared to the previous version, because I do believe that used to be a -2 when you're shooting at something with rail. And when making attacks against aerial units, you actually receive an extra action dice when targeting the opponent. However, when attacking submerged units, you lose an action dice from your dice pool. So it's the type of weapon that you preferably want to shoot at aerial targets if you can. I don't think they are bad weapons at all. The nerf was perhaps justified because they were very strong in the past. Because, well, lots of railguns meant that you could make a ship die from 1,000 cuts through all of those critical hits that kept pouring in rather easily with these. Other special rules that they have, and there's some very strong things in here as well, is the ablative armor. The Russians make very good use of this rule, and that one was also changed with the recent ORBATs. Now, remove an action die from the attack dice pool for each weapon with the gunnery and fusillade quality that supports an attack against this unit. So, in other words, if you are being shot at by lots of either broadsides or gun batteries and heavy gun batteries, you're going to see that dice pool shrink really quickly. This is a very strong rule that effectively counteracts quite a lot of units in this game, especially if your opponent has opted for a lot of the heavy cruiser types of ships that are often just known by having a single gun battery extra in support. Well, that little single gun battery isn't going to do a lot if it's having to shoot at something with ablative armor. So, and you find this on a ton of different ships. Another rule that a lot of these guys get is hammer sweep. You can increase your speed by 1 inch, and you get +2 to the ramming dice pool, provided that it makes no turns in this movement. Now, you don't have to ram, you can just activate this, and this means most of your ship has the option to gain an extra speed if it just goes in a straight line. The next rule that we get for the Commonwealth is the heavy magazines. It's pretty much like it is for all other factions that we've encountered so far. If you've got something with the flagship trait in a unit, that can lead an attack using heavy gun batteries, normal gun batteries, heavy rocket batteries, or rocket batteries, and you can just use the lead values for any of them. And that really is a big buff to flagships in this new ORBAT wave, and we've been very much liking those changes so far. When a flagship activates, it's a scary moment, as it should be. The other one that they get are the Cometa railguns. Now, these give you an advantage when using SRS tokens, because normally when you're using SRS tokens from the Combat Air Patrol rule, that's when they have the most bite. I mean, they are essentially a first strike option. The downside to it is that you get double ADV against those SRS tokens launched in this way, but not against the Russians. You're not allowed to do so, and that is quite a big punch, because especially against things like frigates, lots of SRS tokens can really pull a number on those, because they have piercing rule, meaning a single crit will knock out one of those frigates, and that is very strong, very strong to go with. Next up, we're taking a look at the different Battlefleets that you can select, and when we're checking out the common rules found in Battlefleets, there's not a lot here. It's just a commandery role, so no extra special stuff that is fairly commonly found in these Battlefleets, meaning you get some bad luck protection, as we've seen earlier as well. Just pick up all of the dice of a particularly atrocious dice roll and just throw them again. That's what the commandery role is for. Now, the normal Commonwealth battle fleet, the generic one, Just allows you to take any Commonwealth units, but also only provides that command reroll, so it's not really something that brings a lot to the table. The other ones are the specialized ones. The first one's the Borodino battle fleet. You have to take, of course, a Borodino class to go with it, and then you must include a Kutsov unit. Both are solid entries, so there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just when you're looking at the rest of it, you can't have any aerial units in there, although I've not really spotted a lot of those in the Orbat so far, so I'm not sure how much of a restriction that is. And you can take any other further 3 units, however only with a Russian trait, so you can't start including those Ukrainian ships that are bound to come out soon. Other than that though, if you include a maximum size Kutsov unit, which is your bread and butter type of cruiser unit, all the units in the battle fleet gain a ramming bonus of +3 for their hammer sweep, rather than the usual +2. What does this mean? Not that much. I mean, they're not ships really designed to go and ram anyway. There's some classes of ships that are way better suited for that, but it's there. I mean, it's not that much compared to some other battle fleets, but that doesn't really matter all that much. And it's not the only thing you can do with a Borodino class, as we'll see soon. For a Mosaiski battle fleet, well, you of course have to take the Mosaiski class ship, and then you have to take either the rurik, which is the small type of frigate you get in the frontline squadrons, or pravda units, which can be found in the support squadrons, and those are their generic carrier cruisers. And you can take any other 3 units, again with the Russian trait. You can't spam anything more than 3 times, except for ruriks or pravdas. Now, what do they get? Standard command reroll, as you would expect, but if you include a maximum sized rurik or pravda unit, I'm just going to highlight the pravda unit, because they're the only ones getting a benefit from it. So if you include a maximum sized pravda unit, they do not have their SRS capacity reduced when crippled. So this is the fleet you want to go for if you want to spam those pravda units. If you don't, there's a more interesting choice later down the line. These are the other ones that you can take, with Borodinos or Mosaiskis. Now let's start off with the Borodino one. It's called an icebreaker battle fleet. Now, if you want to take that one, you have to take either a Morosco or a Katanga unit. Those are the ones that generate those icebergs with their cryogenerators. However, those can also be used as quite devastating weaponry themselves. And again, you're locked to using Russian ships. And you can't include more than 2 of any unit except for possibly Kutsovs or the above mentioned cryo cruisers. Now, if you include a maximum sized Morosco or Katanga unit though, those cryogenerators in the battle fleet may re-roll the die for determining iceberg formation. It's again not the most impressive thing, because if you can, you want to use the weapon profile from those generators in my eyes, but it can be fun, especially now with the new mine layers. Could be fun to experiment with. I value this one as being better simply because of the new additions of mines that make icebergs perhaps a more enticing option from time to time, depending on the battle fleet layout. And the better one of the 2, I think, is the Caspian battle fleet, where you get a Mosaiski or a Murmansk, but that one's yet to be released. That's one of their mass 4 ships. And you must include either the Stolitov, those are the Ekranoplans, or Signias fast cruisers. Those are the frontline squadron ones, where you go for the rocket batteries in the front, an all front mounted weapon, 1 heavy and 1 light rocket battery, if I'm not mistaken. And you can take it up to further 2 units with the Russian trait. So it's not like this can become a big unit, a big fleet in and of itself, but they do get a very juicy bonus, because if you include at least 1 maximum sized Ekranoplan, Stolitov Ekranoplan unit, or a Signias unit, then all the Stolitovs or Signias units in the battle fleet gain the high velocity quality to their rocket batteries and heavy rocket batteries. Now, high velocity means that if you roll a double counter against a rocket attack, it only counts as a single counter. So the most common way of defending against rockets is, of course, your ADV, and that one's going to be way less effective in or against this Caspian fleet, making it a strong contender. Stolitovs have also been completely redesigned, by the way, so if you're thinking, why the hell would I want to take that unit? It wasn't quite that good in the previous edition. Well, it has changed, and we'll be taking a look at that one later on. And then two very strong new entries as well, a Ukrainian battle fleet. It's yet to be released, but it's bound to be here soon. You have to include one Akula Grand submarine unit that then gains the flagship trait. These Akula class Grand submarines don't have the flagship trait. They are mass 3 ships, but they're not flagships, but you create one using this rule. And it must include a Kizak unit. Those are new submarines, medium-sized submarines, and in my opinion, also quite a strong entry as well when I saw it. I very much liked the look of the Akula, and I very much liked the look of that new Kizak unit, so that's going to be a very strong entry. And then 3 further Ukrainian ships, so you're locked out of the traditional Russian ships. In case you were combining those two, you do have to pick multiple battle fleets to do so. Now, provided your submarine unit, the Kizak unit, contains 3 models, all units in these battle fleets gain the following rule, which is a vanguard move. That is quite strong, because you just move 5 inches before the battle. There are some battle fleets, like the Prussian icebreaker one, for instance, who look very envious at this very strong move, because all they get is a single inch in their first movement phase, which is of course a way weaker unit. And if I'm brutally honest, all of those Ukrainian ships look really strong for what they do. As for instance, that Kizak unit, I think it's only 55 points for a single one of those submarines. So you're not going to have to invest a lot to trigger this bonus. This looks a very strong contender. And then the Black Wolf mercenary battle fleet is one that is available to virtually every faction in the game I've encountered so far. And you have to include a named variant of the Akula Grand submarine called the Deathbringer, or a named variant of one of those big battle stations that have yet to come out. And you have to include either one of those grand submarines again that we've mentioned with the Ukrainian battle fleet, or one of those lighter submarine units with the Kizaks. And then if you do, you may include up to 4 units, so that's generous, 4 extra units, with any of the following: the Akula Grand submarines, the Katangas, those are the cryogenerators with the heavy bore on the front, the one that I personally just like the look of best. Those new medium-sized submarines, or any piranha, which are the mass 1 submarines coming for the Ukrainian, and ekranoplans, the Stolitov classes. This just looks like a very fun battle fleet to run, if I'm honest. So I'm quite excited for it. And if you're looking at what the Black Wolf mercenaries actually gain as an extra thing, they ignore the effects of the emergency disorder condition, although they still count as having the disorder, so you're still going to take further disorder if you take more of them. Furthermore, while making or defending from an assault, you can reroll blank dice results. However, this rule does not apply if the force this unit is part in has less victory points than the opponent at the last check for victory step. So if you're losing, these guys aren't exactly going to be putting up as much of a fight as they could be, which I think is just a lovely little fluffy addition to it. When we're checking out the different equipment they get, the outfitting yards, we'll see all the usual suspects here. There's only a single unique generator for them, and that is the Cryogenerator. And we've already discussed this a bit beforehand. It can never be upgraded or replaced, but it can be used in 2 ways. Either in the shooting phase to fire a cryogenic blast at a targeting model, or you can just roll an action dice to create an iceberg. On the result of an exploding hit, you may place a 2-inch long Mass 2 iceberg obstacle within 25 inch of this model. So you are creating a 5 centimeter long bit of terrain if you roll the exploding hit. If it's just a hit or a heavy hit, it creates a 1-inch Mass 1 iceberg obstacle within 20 inch of this model. So it's good that they actually mention the sizes of them, the actual physical sizes, just to avoid some confusions. And making icebergs, by the way, is the easiest thing you can do. If you just have a bit of leftover XPS foam, just cut it until it looks like an iceberg, and you're good to go. If you roll a counter or a heavy counter, you may place one of those Mass 1 iceberg obstacles, but only within 15 inch of this model. So if you're trying to block lanes at a long distance, you really are hoping to roll these ones later on. These higher numbers. On a blank, there's no iceberg. And remember, if you're taking this in that fleet, you can re-roll this dice result as well. You cannot, however, place those icebergs within 5 inch of another model, meaning you can't just plonk it straight in front of a ship and cause a collision. Your opponent is going to have to swivel, and is always going to be able to swivel, except when it's the Ice Maiden. That one's just gonna ram straight into it. However, they do not take damage anymore from any collisions, so yeah, that's not much of a deal. Further on, if we're looking at the different weapons you can find, well, that cryogenic blast is mentioned here. It's 8 dice, up to closing range. Comes with the blast profile, so that's already quite strong. Creates a hazard, and gets the devastating rule. And if you're using it on flagships, they sometimes even get the sustained rule as well to this. So that can do a lot of damage, especially if it gets that sustained quality like it does on a Borodino battleship, more on which later. The rest isn't really all that special. We've seen heavy prow rams as well, though in the Crown, I believe it was, so they can actually do a bit of extra ramming as well. And if you just want to have extra ramming but cooler, you use the Semyonov assault bore, giving it piercing and devastating as well. So that's just a better version of it as well. And then the very unique Russian weapon, as mentioned at the top, is a tri-railgun. It gets an extreme range, which is great because it's completely irrelevant what range bracket you shoot it at. It's always 8 dice as the main lead value and 3 in support. Now, this was always a weird one I found in the past because that was remarkably fewer dice than you would just get out of a heavy gun battery shooting at its ideal range. But with the nerfs to rocket batteries and regular gun batteries, or their heavy variants thereof, this weapon is a remarkably interesting choice now for any Russian commanders out there, I think. I mean, the range, the extreme range, means you can punt away with units like Kutsovs from afar, and I think it's just a way more interesting choice than it ever has been due to the other changes. Up next, we're taking a look at some of the flagships that the Commonwealth has access to, and the first one we see is the Borodino battleship. It is now at 234 points, which I believe is up a bit, so that was a slight nerf to it if I'm not mistaken, but it has gotten quite a bit better than it was. I mean, it's very comparable to other heavy battleships that you find in other fleets. With 3 forward-facing heavy gun batteries, it's also one that is extremely easy to pilot because, well, you point it. It's very point and clicky, I think. You point it at what you want to kill and you go for it. The heavy broadsides don't really come into effect unless you are actually at point-blank range, which is when you want to start turning this ship. Now be mindful, if you start turning this ship though, you don't get the full fire arc with 2 of those weapons, so you'll only be firing 2 of those heavy gun batteries at the enemy if you're also using your heavy broadsides, which I don't think is the best way to use this ship then. In other words, I would just keep it as something that goes into closing range and just keeps pounding away at the opponent, using that ablative armor, making it quite a tough cookie to crack, with your heavy magazines rule and the heavy gun batteries doing a lot of the heavy lifting. You can replace one of those heavy gun batteries with a generator if you want, but I don't think it's the most interesting option, simply because they are all pointing forwards. You're not really making any fire arcs better or anything. This is just a well-designed ship. Also, this thing comes with cryo capacitors. We've talked about this already. If you use your internal cryogenerator as the attack, was 8 dice, remember, then it gets the sustained quality to those cryogenic blasts it makes, and 8 dice with this sustained rule is enough to really make things panic with the blast profile associated with it. So this is a no-nonsense ship. It's very, very strong. It also comes with a decent amount of hull points as well, at 13 in total, with a very interesting 9 versus 4, meaning your opponent is going to have to put in work to take this one down. I like this entry a lot. There is a named variant that is dead on arrival now. It's more expensive. It swaps out all of its heavy gun batteries for tri-railguns, but that is a really bad option for a Borodino battleship, because you don't get use out of your heavy magazines. You are going to massively cripple your amount of firepower if you upgrade those weapons, which is why I didn't mention it. And this one has that one upgraded, meaning it's really not that good. You do get elite crew as a compensation, and it is an inspirational ship, so other units can reroll an action dice near you, but it is so much weaker because of the tri-railguns not benefiting from the heavy magazines, and it doesn't even get that rule anymore. I just don't consider this one anymore. I wouldn't take it. Next up is the big carrier, the Mosaiski fleet carrier. At 230 points, it's actually on the cheaper end of the scale when looking at bigger carriers, especially those that have an SRS capacity of 8, usually are found costing a bit more than these. It still comes with ablative armor, and it comes with armor 8, which is also well above what you expect for other carriers, with that 9 and 4 for its hull. So this is again a very tough cookie compared to the other ones. The Russians do make hardy equipment in this game, don't they? And they come with what you'd expect from a carrier. Don't forget, these Kometa railguns make the combat air patrol option for these ships really, really scary. So this is a very solid entry in my book, and yeah, especially in that Caspian battle fleet, you can really go to town with first strikes through a bunch of rocket batteries and a bunch of carriers with these Kometa things. And it just looks cool, doesn't it? Yeah, I really do love the look of that ship. Next up is something that still has to be released, although it was teased on the Facebook group a while ago. That's the Murmansk mobile stronghold. It's a Mass 5 ship, so it's going to be a biggie. And it's coming in at 390 points, which is still reasonable for anything with a Mass 5. And when we're looking at how it's armed, it actually has 2 guns facing in any direction, 2 heavy gun batteries. It means you either find 2 with forward, you either find 2 with port, you find 2 with starboard, or you find 2 with the aft arc. So expect to be firing 2 of those at something, which does sort of make heavy magazines not live up to its total potential, because you can only use it for a single activation, so that is slightly less impressive than I would have liked. The other thing it does though, it has got heavy broadsides, being able to fire in all directions. And don't forget, you can fire broadsides in 2 arcs at the same time, so it can effectively fire in all directions with heavy broadsides. Why is this important? Well, this thing is held in reserve and has an unexpected arrival, which means you just pop it up out of nowhere in the play area, and if you're scared of having to do a reserve roll, you get to re-roll the action die to do so. So it's actually a more reliable way to pop up. And with this weapon profile, you can expect to be firing in all kinds of directions, really. So I think that's going to be a big thing for it. Another thing it can do, it can make a full reverse without getting any levels of disorder, so you can just keep it nice and steady where you want it, which is great. And instead of rolling the action die, if you really want it pinpoint accurate at the time where you want it, you can use this Void Engine overclock. Instead of rolling an action die on the first round, when using the unexpected arrival rule, you can just immediately be made available for deployment and be placed pretty much anywhere in the play area. However, after deploying, it suffers a point of damage and it receives a level of disorder and a reactor leak critical damage marker. However, being mass 5, repairs aren't going to be too bad. And with a total of 22 hull points, it does have some to spare. Mind you, the armor value is not that high at only 7. I say only 7, that is still a very decent result, of course, but you are going to be losing those rather quickly, because for a flagship, Citadel 11 isn't really something to write home about either. It is going to eat a lot of crits, especially if you just dunk it somewhere in the middle of the opposing area. I mean, a bit of caution is probably advised. If you look at the special rules it brings, it's got advanced repair facilities, meaning friendly models within 10 inch of this model, it can actually roll 3 extra action dice pools for their repair tests. So, like I said, with that unexpected arrival rule, just overclock that. You will take a point of damage for it, but you'll probably be repairing that damage fairly easily. You also get some logistical support, meaning you're getting extra cards. That's always good when you're investing in a ship this expensive. And we've already explained the lumbering rules. It can just stay in place after it arrives, which I think is quite strong. I like this entry, I really do. Can't wait for it to see that kit, because the preview looked very promising. A variant of this, a way more expensive variant of this one, also packing 2 more hull points, I think it was? Yeah, 2 more hull points compared to the previous entry, is the Tobolsk Mobile Stronghold. This is, if you don't want the repair facilities, you can get one with an SRS capacity. Mind you, only SRS capacity 5, so it's not like it'll rival the Mosaiski in terms of carrying capacity. However, comes with cryo capacitors, comes with unexpected arrival, comes with that Void Engine overclock that we've already mentioned, and it comes with an internal shield generator, internal magnetic generator, and an internal cryogenerator, meaning it's also quite a tricky one to take down as well. Comes with lumbering, so you can just dunk it anywhere you want and not expect it to move. And when we're looking at the different weapon loadouts, it actually packs rocket batteries in the same way as those heavy gun batteries we talked about earlier. Again, heavy gun batteries though are placed in such a way that making full use out of the heavy magazine rule will be tricky. You will, however, and I'm not sure how this works, this is something I was wondering about. I mean, they might be clearing it up, but with unexpected arrival, you have to be placed in reserve. I'm not sure if you're placed in reserve that you can just stack your SRS tokens on there already when it is actually in reserve. It's something that I hope to see answered. Combat Air Patrol seems to be a weird interaction with unexpected arrival. If you know how it's done though, make sure you mention it in the comments, because I'm a bit at a loss for it. This one also from the Black Wolf mercenaries, so you can, I think you could include it. It has that keyword at least, so yeah. It's a very interesting one at least, very expensive, but definitely a hard-hitting one. And then you also have an even harder-hitting one, the Anastasia. I think this is the named one that you can take in the Black Wolf mercenary fleet, and the one that definitely has that requirement next to the Deathbringer. Comes with all the bells and whistles that you could want. Special rules is just, it's a list that's almost too long to go over, but it's a doozy. Cryo capacitors combined with internal magnetic generator, internal shield generator, and if I'm not mistaken, an internal cryo generator. It's like a better version of the Tobolsk as it was. The weird thing about it is though, it again comes with the tri-railguns all over the place, and they do not stack too well with the heavy magazines rule. Now, if I'm not mistaken, heavy magazine wasn't found on here at all, in fact. No, can't seem to find it, which is a shame because those rocket batteries would still be benefiting from it if it had it, but it doesn't, so that's a bit of a shame. And the interesting thing is, this one combines the SRS capacity that you find on the Tobolsk, combined with advanced repair facilities. So this is sort of the Uber variant, if you will, of this mobile fortress. So I think it's going to be a fun one to play with. And the good thing is, it doesn't matter what army you play, you can employ it. It's part of the mercenaries. So yeah, interesting entry altogether. And then another interesting entry for everyone, because this is the other option you can take for Black Wolf mercenaries as your flagship, is the Deathbringer, which is a supercharged Akula class submarine. When we're looking at the weapon loadout, it gets that assault bore for the ramming. It's great. Three heavy torpedoes, 2 pointed to the front and 1 pointed to the rear, and then 2 gun batteries, regular ones, as sort of smaller support options as well. And the ability to lay mines as well, which can, well, I think it's going to be interesting to test that one out, like I said, with the cryogenerators, to see just how much you can screw over your opponent's movement, really. And yeah, Black Wolf mercenary rule, we've seen that one. And for a small additional 10 points, which I would use, you can use the unexpected arrival rule, making it show up anywhere you want, and allowing you to re-roll the action die to determine the reserve result. So this one's going to be terrorizing a lot of enemy fleets, I think, mainly because it's so accessible for everyone. And yeah, really liking it. It's the gun batteries don't have any heavy magazines rules with this one, so that one's also something you have to take into account. It does have ablative armor. What it doesn't have, though, is a lot of hull points compared to other flagships. But being a submerged unit, it is going to find some protection from that, of course. However, Armor 7, Citadel 12 is on the lower end of the scale for flagships, so do take that into account. It is a bit fragile for its points cost, but it packs a heavy punch, so it's going to be an interesting one. On a small little side note, I do not know what this is. All I know is that I want it when it is released. Looks amazing with that cryogenerator on the top. Now, onto the most important section, all of the different ships you can find. And we've talked about this one before. It's the Akula Grand Submarine. It's a Mass 3 ship, but it does not come with the flagship trait directly. However, if you take it in one of those Ukrainian fleets, it does gain it. It's 200 points. If we're looking at the weapon loadout though, that is a lot of torpedoes. We're seeing 4 of them, a heavy and 3 normal ones aimed towards the front, so that's scary. And then another light one aimed towards the back. And, just for good measure, it comes with 2 extra gun batteries as well. Those are just lightly armed gun batteries, though they don't get boosted because of heavy magazines or anything. But yeah, there's no shortage of firepower here, and that makes that 200 points cost very reasonable. 10 hull points in grand total is also nothing to sneeze at. However, you find armor values and citadel values that are more associated with cruisers rather than flagships. So there is that, of course. You are going to have to rely a bit on your submerged quality to stay alive with this one. It can arrive via unexpected arrival as well for an extra 10 points, like we saw earlier with the Deathbringer model, and it comes with mine layer, so all of that is very interesting as well. And for a submarine, it comes with ablative armor as well, making it reasonably well protected. I like this entry, really do. Next up is the Katanga Cryo Assault Cruiser. It's a chunky boy at 144 points, but it comes with that ramming device. It comes with one single rocket battery, 2 heavy gun batteries that can be swapped out should you so desire for heavy rocket batteries, which is something I would expect you to do. But that bumps it up to 150 points, which is a solid investment for a cruiser. But if you do bump those up, you are firing with 3 rocket batteries, so that is definitely no joke in terms of firepower. In terms of toughness, well, there is of course the always expected ablative armor with these Russians. You do get 10 hull points for it, so that's more than the commonly 8 found on cruisers in other factions. However, you don't really notice it for the armor and citadel value, which is at a very normal 6 and 10. So it's it can pack a punch. It does also get that internal Cryogenerator, adding more to its firepower, because don't forget it shoots 8 dice with a blast, which isn't anything to sneeze by, especially with especially with that devastating quality on it. However, this one doesn't gain the sustained rules. It's not a flagship, so it's potent, no doubt, but not as potent as it was on the Borodino, of course. Overall, reasonably solid entry, although the cost is a bit prohibitive to just spam it, but yeah, it's one I would still consider though. Next up is one that I think is just amazing for its point value, 55 points for a Kizak Attack submarine, which is a Mass 2 ship, 3 hull points however only, and 2 in its crippled state, so only 5 hull points, with only armor 5 and citadel 10. I mean, that's probably why it costs so little, because when we're looking at the weapon loadout, you get a heavy torpedo salvo for just 55 points on something that doesn't just turn over and dies when it's hit by a single critical hit. It has a torpedo salvo aimed at the rear as well, but I don't think you're going to be making that much use out of that one. And it does have a 360-degree rocket battery associated with it, just for good measure, you know. One thing it doesn't get though is that ablative armor that you often found on the Russian ships, so you really are going to have to rely on that submerged trait to keep it alive. But then again, at 55 points, can't really go wrong, especially when you consider that this one is made specifically to hunt down other submerged units through that maritime patrol, as long as you get any SRS tokens within 5 inch of it. And it can clear out any mines as well, should it so desire. And at 7 speed, that is a decent amount for a submarine. I mean, if you take this entry and you compare it to the Crown one, I think that one was 80 points when I was doing that deep dive. I would prefer this one, if I'm honest, just with the more interesting points cost associated with it. Next up is the Kutsov, the good old Kutsov, one of the first entries, or the first released ships. 88 points for a cruiser, and what do you get out of it? 5 hull points in the battle ready stage, that's great. Ablative armor to keep you alive a bit longer, that's great. 2 heavy gun batteries, one 270 degree to the front, one 270 degrees to the rear. I just think this is a very solid entry altogether. I mean, it's still reasonably fast. It's what you'd expect for a cruiser, and these days 88 points is very, very reasonable. Also, you can upgrade them to tri-railguns, which, if I'm not mistaken, has gotten a bit cheaper, because I thought that used to be 9 points, but I might be mistaken. If you're bumping it up with 2 tri-railguns, it brings it up to 100 points, because you're investing 12 points extra. And I think that is super solid. It's an upgrade I would consider for the Kutsov, simply to have something with long-range firepower, because, let's be honest, except for the torpedo attacks from the Ukrainians, or provided by the Ukrainians, this isn't a faction that has any bombard-type weapons to obliterate you from afar. This is a fleet that is just made on being tough and reliable and just going in for that closing range, and these Kutsovs can change that rather well, so it's something I would consider. A Morosco heavy cryo cruiser is sort of the slightly weaker brother, but at a more reasonable 131 points cost compared to the Katanga, but it doesn't get that bore at the front. But it does get everything else that you would want it. It has an internal cryogenerator, again adding to the firepower. Comes with a rocket battery in the front and then 2 heavy gun batteries. Again, I would always consider swapping these out for an extra 3 points. One thing I'm mentioning here with the Morosco, simply because I wanted to have something to say with that one, but this also applies to the Katanga, is you can swap out that rear heavy gun battery for a shield generator or a shrouding generator if you so desire, if you want something that is a bit more tough. And the combination of a shield generator, it's only -2 though, because it is a mass 2, but that combined with ablative armor can really ruin someone's day if they brought the wrong fleet composition to take on your Russians. I think these are the ones, this fleet in and of itself is something that can keep spamming gun batteries in check all on its own. Next up is the Norrelis heavy cruiser. It's also made out of frontline squadrons, and it is a heavy cruiser, alright. I mean, 10 hull points is no joke, especially when combined with that standard ablative armor, and it gets a heavy broadside, very noticeable as well compared to the normal Kutsov. So you are getting a bit of a return for your points cost. I mean, it is, if I'm not mistaken, almost 30 points more expensive than the standard Kutsov. And for that you get the normal gun battery extra. You get a bit of extra toughness in terms of hull points, although it comes at the expense of some speed. But yeah, you do get those heavy broadsides. I don't think this is bad. For a heavy cruiser, it's about in line what you would expect from other nations. Shoots quite well and comes with that juicy ablative armor. Solid entry still in my book. The Oleg Monitor is the smallest variant you can build with the frontline squadrons. There's not really that much remarkable going on with this ship though. It even has a bit of a lower citadel value, and I've not found this one to be necessary in any of the Battlefleets. It's never a required entry for any of them. So yeah, I'm just not that enamored with this one. However, should you want some access to cheap tri-railguns, it does boost it up to 68 points when you're doing so. Just swapping out that one heavy gun battery is an option if you're a bit, a bit low on points to afford a maximum sized Kutsov unit with railguns. And this one allows you to just advance still. The Kutsov has that downside that it has to fire to the sides if it wants to use 2 weapons, and you don't get that with the Oleg monitors. So that's about the best use I could think of this ship. It doesn't mean it's a bad entry, it's just, it's uninspiring compared to what the rest brings you. And then we've got Mass 1 submarines, still have to come out because they are Ukrainian, in the Piranha Hunter submarines. Now, they are 30 points per model, which is also very reasonable for a submarine. It's what you'd expect from other nations as well, and comes with a torpedo salvo, which is a very okay weapon for a ship of this size. It does, however, have only 4 armor and 8 citadel, but again, that's not uncommon for Mass 1 ships, so there's nothing wrong with that one. It comes with the Vanguard rule, so it can actually sneak up the board slightly further, although I'm not sure if that's a smart thing to do, however, because of their frailty, and they are using extreme range weapons, so I would just be sitting back and peppering your opponent with torpedoes with these. They also have the option to escort any Ukrainian ships. However, I think you're not allowed to take any more than just the 2 ones, which is probably why this unit cannot have too many models in there. And if it's part of the Black Wolf mercenary rule, you can do that. It does trade in the Ukrainian trade for Black Wolf trade, so again, an interesting choice for everyone, because Black Wolf Mercenaries is, I think, the most fleshed out mercenary fleet so far. But yeah, interesting choice. And then the Pravda support carrier, in line with what you would expect. It's an SRS capacity of 4, which is what you expect for cruiser-sized carriers, at 120 points. However, the Kometa railguns are very strong. I mean, most of these carriers have to make up for their costs in the first turn, and you get hampered by that pesky double ADV, and these can get around that very, very neatly. So, yeah, strong option in my book. The Rurik frigate is, if I'm not mistaken, one of the cheapest frigates in the in the game right now. You pay 20 points per model, which is not a lot. And if you're ever getting stuck in a frigate versus frigate shootout, they have ablative armor, which is hilarious, on a ship that is only armor 4 and citadel 8 with 2 hull points. But that means that shootout is quite likely to be won by these guys. And if you're playing with treacherous water, they can just treat it as open water as well, should you so desire. And you can escort any Russian ships with a small unit of these ruriks, just to add a bit of extra ADV if you want. It's only +1 though for each other's ADV and SDV to a combined maximum of +4, but you know, for an extra 80 points, giving one of your main flagships +4 ADV, that's nothing to, or SDV of course, that's nothing to sniff at. That can make those things highly resistant to any aerial or submerged attacks, so that's great. I love it when small Mass 1 ships are useful. The Signias fast cruiser is a build option from the frontline squadrons, where you're going for the gun battery in the front, with a heavy gun battery also in the front, but nothing in the rear. And at 75 points for speed 9, that is fairly decent. It still gets 8 hull points, and you get 6 attack and 9. You can replace the gun battery for a rocket battery if you want, for free, and you can replace the heavy gun battery with a heavy rocket battery. And I think this is the most interesting build, because that one is the one that works so well in that Caspian fleet. Because you mustn't forget, if you're taking them in that one, they are also gaining high velocity attacks, and that really makes a difference, because you can't get any heavy counters on aerial attacks if these guys are swapping out to rockets. So that's definitely something worth considering, and I think it's a strong entry just for that alone. Next up are the stolitovecranoplans, and they've been completely redesigned compared to their old version. They've been simplified a lot. There's way fewer weapons on there, but you're also only paying 48 points per model now. So they used to, well, they were always Mass 2, but they sort of, you know, fell flat compared to Mass 2 ships, because they were so vulnerable, and they are still more vulnerable. But at 48 points, doesn't really matter all that much, does it? You get a heavy rocket battery, and a normal rocket battery, and a torpedo salvo for your money. That is a very decent amount of firepower for what they can do. And they come with the added bonus now of being mine layers, so with this cheap points cost, you can actually place quite a few mines on the battlefield, making it a very interesting combination with those cryo ships, which just so happens to be something you can do when you're building a Black Wolf mercenary fleet again. So that's great, you can just start using these. Also with Caspian overthrusters, they can move pretty darn fast. They can move up to 16 inches if they are not taking any... it may not make any turns during the same activation. And your heavy rocket battery and normal rocket battery gains the extreme range quality, which is amazing when you consider it works in tandem with Spotter. So if you have a few SRS tokens, or even a cheeky one from a Pravda ship, or that Caspian fleet working with the Mosaiski for instance, you can really go to town with these. Don't forget, in that Caspian fleet these things will be firing with Spotter, so they're just re-rolling all of those dice at an extreme range, with torpedo salvos as well, and getting high velocities for those rocket batteries. That can be a scary amount of firepower, and their fragility might not even be that much of an issue, because if you just plonk them down in the corner of the battlefield, you can move up with those Caspian overthrusters by 10 inches, still be out of harm's way, and with all of their extreme range weapons, they can shoot across the board in essence in one go. So I really like this new design of the stolitovecranoplan. I think it's great because I also love the models, so it's great that they got better and improved rules. A thumbs up to War Cradle for that. And that concludes the Commonwealth deep dive. It's one of the biggest factions, and it's one of the biggest factions because you can combine it so well with any other faction. So I think when they are going to be releasing both those fortresses and the Ukrainian battle fleet, it's something I'm definitely jumping on, because I can use them in any other fleet that I have. So thumbs up for that as well. If you liked this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and I hope to see you in the next installment of the ORBAT deep dives. Hope to see you then. Bye.